Hello, everybody. Welcome to Innovation Root Studio. And today I'm very excited to have Mary and Tom Popendick with us in this discussion where we'll be having some insightful and valuable discussions around being contrarian, about inverted U curve theory, about what is performance, and a lot more. So I'm quite excited about it. Welcome, Mary, and welcome, Tom, to this discussion.
It's good to be here.
Indeed.
Thank you. And let me just briefly tell everybody about Mary and Tom. So, Mary started her career as a process control programmer, and she moved on to manage the IT department of a manufacturing plant, and then ended up in the product development, where she was both a product champion and department manager. And she wrote the award-winning book Lean Software Development, an Agile Toolkit in 2003, where she explained how the lean principles from manufacturing offer a better approach to software development. So we are really excited to have her, and along with her, we have Tom, who has 25 years of experience in computing, including 8 years of work in object technology. His modeling and mentoring skills are rooted in his experience as a physics professor. And he has also co-authored the book Lean Software Development along with Mary, published in 2003, and its sequels. I'm really glad to have you both with me in this discussion today.
It's good to be here.
Thank you. So let's begin with our topic of discussion today, Mary and Tom. For the uninitiated, what does it mean by being a contrarian? Is it good or bad?
Okay, so back in 2001, which was 20 years ago, the prevailing way that everybody thought you should develop software was using the waterfall method, using figure everything out, plan the work, and then work the plan. And a contrarian is somebody who takes a look at what everybody thinks is good or the right way to do things, and they say to themselves, what's wrong with this? How can it be better? Instead of what's right about this, how can I do what everybody else is doing? And so I wrote a book which basically said, what is wrong with this whole waterfall process that everybody thinks? You shouldn't be doing stuff sequentially. You should be doing stuff in sequence. You shouldn't wait until everything is done before you try it. You should try it on an iterative basis. You shouldn't hand stuff over a wall downstream. You should have the upstream and downstream people in the process talking constantly. Now, 20 years ago, that was radical. I mean, that was different than contrary to what everybody thought. Today, being a contrarian means taking a look at the prevailing way that people do things, and it happens to be Agile, and saying the same thing. What's wrong with Agile? Why? What kinds of things about the way people think you should be doing processes don't work? How can they be better? How can they be different? So when we first did Agile and Lean stuff in the early 2000s, a vice president of a company Tom was working for said, no, a CIO said, I hear what you're saying, but I can't do it because none of my colleagues are doing that. I can't be so, it's too risky because nobody else does that, okay? And a contrarian would say, I see what you're saying and it's different than what everybody else is doing, so it sounds really interesting. So being a contrarian might be good or it might be bad. It depends upon how risk averse you are and how risk averse you should be.
The decisions that we make day to day are based on our mental models of how things work, we believe, or how they should work. And people forget that mental models are always wrong. There's no such thing as a perfect mental model that is a perfect representation of cause and effect in the universe we live in. Now, there are two approaches you can take. You can work on doing better and better at realizing your mental model, or you can be a skeptic about your mental model and look for the weaknesses and look for opportunities to find better mental models for the current context that you're actually living in. And the contrarian approach is the second one. It's being a skeptic about the mental models that people use to make their choices are not totally correct. And the focus is on how to make it better.
Thank you, Mary and Tom. Most of the times we have seen that being skeptical is not much appreciated by the people around. And my next question is around the same, that if someone who thinks independently can be called a contrarian.
Well, it depends. Just because you think independently doesn't mean you accept or reject or are skeptical about the existing mental model. Just because you think independently doesn't mean you're trying to improve on the mental model. And I think if you look at what's equal, it's people who are constantly trying to improve the way things are done. So a really classic theme in Lean is constant improvement. And the only way you can do constant improvement is to believe that things have to be improved. You have to believe that no matter what you're doing right now, there's always a way to do it better. So you are not looking for standard practices. You are not looking for the way everybody else does things. You are looking for, here I am, and here's the way we've been doing things. And we need to get better because clearly there's got to be ways to do better. So what about what we're doing can be changed and improved? So you're constantly looking for changes and improvements in the way things are done. And it starts with the way you're doing things. So you're never trying to look for best practices or the way that we do things doesn't change. You are always looking for, we better be doing something different than we were doing a month ago.
I'm somewhat skeptical of the idea that thinking can be anything but independent. If it's not independent, then it's rote recitation.
It's not thinking.
It's performance rather than creativity.
Good point.
It's true that it's a very, very valid point, Tom, added by you. I mean, I'll remember it for a long, long time. So moving on, Mary and Tom, as we are talking about the performance and thinking skeptically, we are talking about the inverted U curve as well a lot these days. So please share your thoughts on inverted U theory and its relevance in the current times.
So the inverted U is the concept that basically everything in moderation. You know the story of Goldilocks and the Three Bears? And she tasted the porridge, and some was too hot, and some was too cold, and some was just right. So the inverted U curve is sort of like Goldilocks looking for the just right temperature. So Aristotle thought that virtue was sort of halfway between two extremes. So courage was halfway between recklessness and timidness, and so on. So if you think about the inverted U, like it's think of a bridge, a curved bridge. That's inverted. There's a sweet spot in the middle, which is perfect. And then on the two sides, there's extremes, which are not. So if you take a look at the inverted U, then you think about things like, let's see, I have something here. Oh, yes. You think about, well, let's take Agile, since I'm going to be a contrarian about Agile. Agile talks about autonomy, but the fact is there can be too much autonomy. We often saw, like in the early 2000s, 2005, 7, we saw teams that were so independent that nobody could tell them what to do. We get to make our own decisions. And people that thought teams should have too much autonomy were unable to do large things which required lots of groups of people. Or, no, you can't give us a deadline. How are we supposed to know? That's not a group of people, a large group working together to, for example, let's say the next rocket launch is February 6th. Now, if you're one of those teams that is working for the rocket launch, you can't say, I can't meet the deadline, because guess what? The rocket's going to launch on February 6th, like it or not. So you have to do your best by then. So the inverted U says autonomy is good up to a point, and then there can be too much. Similarly, efficiency, okay? Everybody wants to be efficient, right? It's good. More efficiency is better, until we had a pandemic. And we discovered that the most efficient supply chains collapsed. And the ones that had excess and slack are the ones that survived. So yes, there can actually be too much efficiency. And too much communication. Isn't always communication good? Well, you know, Toyota has this saying that great conflict makes great cars. So you can actually have communication where there are too many people trying to talk at the same time. So Jeff Bezos said communication is a bad thing. We should have independent teams about, you know, that you can feed with 2 pizzas, and that's it. And those teams should be autonomous. And if you have great big meetings with all kinds of people trying to talk together and set goals and figure out you know, dependencies and stuff like that, that's too much communication. You need to figure out how your architecture can support a lot less communication. And then to get back to the too much consensus is what I meant. Too much consensus means everybody agrees. Too much agreeableness. There can be too much agreeableness, because you never get any new ideas if you don't have some skeptics. If you don't have people that have completely different ideas from what everybody else is thinking. That's where innovation comes from. Do you have anything on that?
Mental models all have constraints. And the inverted U is basically a recognition that if you push any mental model too far, the limitations of it are going to reveal themselves and begin to dominate the good things that you got from the model in the first place. So if you are not skeptical, if you keep pushing as a fervent believer in any particular mental model, be it Agile or Lean or Waterfall or anything else, you will eventually destroy the good things about the model, the good aspects of it, because the weaknesses will reveal themselves.
Which is why we generally don't talk a lot about Lean anymore, because Lean has gotten pushed too far, you know, over the bridge to too much of a good thing.
Yeah, I agree. So can we say too much of anything is not that good?
Generally speaking, that's true. There are a few things, I suppose, but when it comes to virtues, you know, virtuous stuff, I think Aristotle had an interesting point. You get too much of a virtue and you've gone over to excess. You can be too courageous and kill yourself. You can be too much focused on a single thing and not see the big picture. You can be too much big picture and not see the small things. So I really think that excess is probably is generally speaking going to be something to be wary of no matter where you are.
Water is a good thing, but too much will drown you.
Yeah, the way you conclude the answer is amazing, Tom. Thank you. So moving on to one important aspect of the professional lives we are into. So many often people talk about performance improvement, but what is performance and how should we measure it? Can you share your thoughts on it, Mary and Tom?
Yes, I think that we've made a mistake in Agile in defining performance as more working software. Okay, and we need to think about performance as if we were making a product. Think about Spotify. Spotify doesn't worry about giving teams cost, schedule, deadlines. They think about making sure that teams are creative enough to come up with great ideas, great features that customers love, or not come up with great features. You don't care if your Spotify has 5 new features every month. You care if it always works, if it knows the kind of music that you want to hear. So performance means thinking about the people who are using what it is that you are making and making it better for them, having them more delighted. So we need to stop measuring how much stuff we do and start measuring the customer-focused outcomes. And I don't mean I'm an IT department, my business is my customer. Absolutely not. It is not your customer. Your customer are the people who pay your company to provide them with something. Is what you are doing making them happier or not? Because if it's not enhancing the experience of your ultimate customers in some way, it's probably doesn't matter how much you do. And in fact, if you take a look at a code base, all right, too much code is usually a mess. Doesn't matter. Too many features are usually a mess. Lots of interactions, lots of testing. The better code bases are the ones that are more simple. And yet we have metrics to say how many features did we do? You know, how fast did we do them? Does the customer care how fast you do it? Well, generally speaking, but not necessarily. The customer cares that you took the time to understand the way they thought and give them something that they would like. And that's what performance should always be measured on. And we've made a mistake. I think it's our history of, there's really 2 kinds of software engineering. One is the one that has been around traditionally until, I don't know, the 90s, and that was an IT department in a large company. And they automated business processes on computers. And then starting in the 90s, and especially after that, we started, well, even in the 80s to some extent, we started having softwares that were products, you know, like Spotify or my apps on my mobile phone or something like that. And those are specifically aimed at putting software in the hands of people so they can do interesting things. And today, almost all products out there have some sort of software enhancement so that you can use it better. I don't care if I've got a vacuum cleaner over there that, you know, has my whole map of my house stored on the web and knows where to go all by itself. So even the simplest products have intelligence and smarts. And it's the putting intelligence in products kind of software that is the kind of software that's going to move companies ahead today. And when you think about product software that's aimed at customers, at people, and when I first bought my vacuum cleaner, it could only do 1 level, and I've got a 3-level house. But however, at about 8 months in, I got a software update, and now I can vacuum all levels. And that was an enhancement that I loved. And I would have liked it a little earlier, but I absolutely love it. Now, the people who devised and thought of that software were brilliant, and they performed really well. And it's creating something that's added onto that product that I absolutely love, that's really important to me. And those are the things that we should be measuring, not whether or not we did what somebody else asked us to do, but whether or not what we did had an impact on customers. And you can measure that.
Productivity is largely a measure of how fast you can answer questions. How fast can you deliver an answer? And while there's nothing wrong with delivering an answer quickly to a problem, it's also the least relevant aspect of being successful. The relevant aspect is asking the right questions, building the right product, building the features that are going to make a difference. Now, asking the right question is hard. Asking the right question is intelligence required, not just capacity required. It's a matter of being very sensitive to the context that you are addressing and being very open to changes in the information that you have about that context, about the people that you're solving problems for, that you're providing capabilities to. And that has very little to do with how fast you can write code. It has to do with, can you write code that it helps you explore a situation so that you can identify the questions that matter in the domain that you're working in.
I don't know, 15 years ago or so, we were working with a company in Washington, D.C. that was doing a major project for military. And they were under a really standard contract with government. And they asked us, what can we do to do a better job here? So I was looking at what they were doing, and every month they reported to they were looking at threats for a particular government military area. And every month they reported to the general how they were coming along. And I said, well, what do you tell them? And they had all these 63 charts of burn down charts and earn value charts and you name it. And I says, yeah, really? And I'll bet you that every time you show these, the general falls asleep. And they said, yep. And I said, okay, so what one thing can you present to the general that will keep him awake, that he cares about? And you should show that. They said, well, we got to show these 63. I said, well, I'll tell you what, since he's going to fall asleep, you lead your presentation with 1 or 2 or 3 charts of stuff that the general absolutely cares about. And then you can show all the rest of the 65. That's okay, and let him fall asleep. And 6 months later, we went back and we said, well, how's it going? And he said, oh, we only show 3 charts anymore because we found out that what the general cared about was how many threats were addressed by our current software. How many threats could we handle? We started out with 3 and then we added a few more. And every month he's just so eager to see our chart of how many more threats are being covered by our software. And nothing else matters. So that one thing, how many threats we can handle, was the only thing that the general cared about. And that's how they measured their performance. How many threats does the general care about? So if you want to know what performance is, even if you're working on a project, look at the person who's paying the money, who's getting the benefit. What do they care about? What would keep them awake if you showed it to them every month? And that's the only thing that you really should be measuring your progress towards, is creating more of whatever it is that whoever funded the project really cares about.
The other 65 charts were project management productivity metrics.
Right. Who, and the general could not care, had no interest in how the project was coming along. Why would people care? So performance is what the person who has chartered the project really has chartered it for, and how are you coming along achieving that goal?
Yeah, that's a really amazing explanation of what performance can be and what it is. Thank you. I mean, I really love both of your answers. And now let's talk about productive disagreement that often happens in the organizations. So highlight the significance of it and how to use it to leverage diversity.
Okay, so one of the things that some of the work, even in DevOps, has done is leverage this sort of attitude that really is kind of human nature, and that is we shouldn't have conflict. We should all agree with each other. And methods were made for voting on, decisions, and There is a technique called brainstorming in which everybody gets to put their opinions out and nobody is allowed to criticize. That's interesting, but it's basically also true when you do research on it that it's not particularly useful. Where you get some real innovation is when people don't agree with everybody else. And if you take a look at a group of people, there will be some louder people and some quieter people, some people who come from a culture where disagreement is not done. You know, if you're from South Korea, you never contradict somebody who's senior to you, for example. And so people who just naturally, by their upbringing or by their background, don't speak a lot. People who are junior and they assume that the senior people know what they're doing. And it's those people who are quiet and who are quiet for a reason that you need to figure out how to get them engaged in saying what they think. And you don't actually want them to say, yes, we agree with everybody else. You want them to say, what is different about what are you bringing here that would give us a new and different perspective? So in the Army, when they have planning and they're about to go on a mission and they do the final recap of it, they ask the most junior person in the room to start out with criticism of what the plan is. Because if a senior person starts out, then the junior person won't criticize anything the senior person said. So they start out having the most junior ranked person critique the approach that they're trying to take. So they get new and different ideas because the senior people, what? They think it's good already, almost by definition. So what you're looking for with productive disagreement is people not always agreeing and figuring out how to capitalize on it. So for example, at 3M, we had a 15% rule, which said you can take 15% of your time and work on whatever you want. It doesn't have to be anything to do with, it has to be something for the company, but it doesn't have to be for your division even. And if you can recruit a few other people, they can spend their 15% time and you can develop new products. 3M had decades of massively interesting new products because it had a technique to encourage people who had different ideas to take some time, recruit some assistants, and work on those ideas. Now, if they were in a team meeting and everybody voted on which way the team should proceed, they wouldn't ever win a vote because their idea is too weird and too far out. So if you vote on things, you are almost immediately excluding minority opinions. What you really should be doing is putting techniques in where people who have different ideas than the group feel supported in expressing those and pursuing them. So the thing that helped at 3M is if you had a weird idea and you could recruit 2 or 3 people to work with you on it, you could pursue it. Similarly, if you have people in your group that have weird ideas, but they can recruit a couple or 3 people on the team to work with them on this new and different idea, they should do it. That's how Spotify discovered Discover Weekly. The team was supposed to be doing this crazy website, which was messy and all of that. But one of the new guys whose area was figuring out how to attract customers started working with a data scientist on some tests to see if they looked at the listening stream of a customer, could they then predict what the customer might like? And they came up with a technique that was dramatically different and very successful. And the whole team stopped what it was doing, even though at first none of them would even agree with that this was a good idea. But when it proved to be a good idea, they pursued it and they had a whole new area of their product, which created a great amount of added customer sort of loyalty. So you want to have productive disagreement. You want to have people who do not think the way everybody else thinks, able to pursue the way that they would like to do things. And in fact, if you take a look at 2 different sides of an issue, everybody on each side has some valid reasons why they think their side is good. the thing that you're trying to do is to get the best of each side. Get the best of each side, each way of looking at an issue. So, for example, when Procter and Gamble was trying to do new products, they had a technique where they would come up with product ideas, and then the person who most thought that the product idea would never work was the one who needed to be convinced that it would. So they took the biggest skeptic and said, okay, if you can convince that skeptic that this is an idea worth pursuing, then that's a good idea. So they looked for the biggest skeptic on the idea and tried to understand the reasons why that person was skeptical and address those reasons early. So it's really, you're not looking for everybody to agree or to be happy with each other or anything like that. You are actually looking for some conflict.
The key question that they asked was, what would have to be true for this to work? And
You're right.
that question is very, very powerful, because that question is at the heart of your mental model of how things work. How would things have to work? What would have to be cause and effect in this domain in order to have that approach be viable and effective? And the question is, how do you determine what would have to be true and whether it's true or not? The approach that they took was to have the biggest skeptic explore, not the biggest supporter, but the biggest skeptic explore and prove that this was or wasn't supporting the proposal.
Yeah, that's amazing. I think both of your answers will encourage people in the organizations and different fields to encourage productive disagreement instead of avoiding those or neglecting those. So I'm really happy, and I think the example, Mary, you have mentioned about the army, about the junior most criticizing the plan makes a lot of sense to understand the entire scenario of productive disagreement. So thank you very much, both of you. And now I would like to understand from both of you your experiences on integrative thinking as a mechanism for great choices.
So it's just a sort of the next phase, or maybe an earlier phase, of the concept of productive disagreement. Roger Martin of the Toronto School of Business, is that it? Has this thing about how creative tension really helps. And creative tension means holding two completely opposite ideas in your mind or in the mind of a group and still being able to function. And still finding the way to create a solution out of the best parts of both of them. And then later on, he co-authored with Jennifer Riel, R-I-E-L, a book called Creating Great Choices. And this is integrative thinking, although integrative thinking has been around for a actually really long time. Back when Frederick Winslow Taylor was doing his thing, there was another, what was her name? A woman who's, I'll have to look it up, who came up with the idea that really what you want is not, there's three choices. There's either I win or you win and I lose, or there's find a way for us both to win. And it requires integrative thinking to find a way for us both to win. So what you try to do is take a look at opposing points of view. And in fact, the further apart they are, the better. And you get each person who holds this point of view and that point of view, or each group, to list the benefits of their perspective, because there are benefits. Otherwise, they believe that there are benefits. And then you take a look at those benefits and say, how do we get them all? So when Agile first came on the scene, people thought it was terrible because you know, because it was too fast, because it was sloppy, because it wasn't predictable. All those kinds of things were wrong with Agile. But on the other hand, the plan the work and work the plan thing was too slow. The environment changed too fast, so you couldn't deal with change and all of that. After a while, I think a decade, we came up with a way of thinking about how you do software development, which was sort of the best of both worlds. And I would call it continuous delivery. The thing about continuous delivery is it took a decade for us to figure out how we could automate the testing of software we're about to deploy and constantly test and then be able to deploy immediately. And should we make a mistake, be able to roll back really fast. So the ability to rapidly deploy and safely deploy actually made our systems more secure. Because if you do a tiny change to something and can easily detect if it's wrong and roll back, that turns out to be way more secure than big bang changes. But we didn't know how to do that. We didn't have the concept of how do we create an automated pipeline which will put stuff into production safely. But eventually, over time, we built that knowledge, and then we had the best of both worlds. We had something which was predictable, which was safe, which was secure, and yet which was fast and extremely adaptable to change. And it's you need both of them. You don't just need rapid change, you need safety, and you need a very disciplined testing approach. And when you put those both together, you get kind of what we have today. You don't have either plan the work, work the plan, or on the other side, be completely extemporaneous. You have sort of a merge of the good parts of both. And that, I think, is what integrative thinking is. When you have two opposing ideas, you don't compromise because then everybody loses. And you don't choose one because then half of the people lose. You figure out how to get what the benefits of each side are, and then be very creative about finding out how to achieve both sets of benefits.
It's not really about winning or losing. That makes it personal. It's about suffering the bad parts of one model versus the other model. If you choose one, then you're stuck with the bad aspects, the weaknesses of that model. If you choose the other, you still have the bad aspects of the other model. And there are always bad aspects, no matter what model you have. The integrative thinking is about doing a creative integrated thinking to find a model that gives you the best aspects of both, not just the one or the other.
So
it'll have its own weaknesses, but at least you get both. Mary Parker follow.
Yeah.
At least you get all the good things from both.
So I just checked. The person who I was thinking of is Mary Parker Follett, and she lived from 1868 to 1933, and she was one of the most important management thinkers of her time, and she was a cohort, lived at the same time frame as Frederick Winslow Taylor. And she basically thought of management as the art of getting things done through people. And she thought of conflict as the mechanism for diversity to come out. And she thought about integrative thinking and spoke of integrative thinking as a way by which both sides get what they wish, get the good parts of what they wish they could have. And so integrative thinking is not new. It's been around for a long time. It just was the contrarian point of view at the first part of the 19th century.
True that, and I'm definitely going to read more things which are shared by Mary, and we'll come back to you for more such discussions around integrative thinking, what she has written earlier.
The best book to read, if you're going to do any reading on there, is Creating Great Choices by Jennifer Ryle and Roger Martin.
Thank
Definitely.
you. I would definitely go for it. And with that, Mary and Tom, I come to the last question that I have for both of you. So, can you tell something about the speed at which processes are becoming obsolete in the technology world?
Well, I've been in the technology world I wrote my first program in 1962. I had my first job in 1967, writing software. And so you can see that's been a very long time. And I have seen a whole lot of changes. And I can tell you for all of those many over 50 years, nothing that's 10 years old is new anymore. It's getting really old. And nothing that's 20 years old anything that's 20 years old is obsolete. So it's not just the technology that changes, it's the way that we deal with the technology. So for example, 20 years ago, we didn't have any kind of really seriously good automated testing concepts. They just didn't exist. It's not like we couldn't do it. We didn't think about it. It didn't occur to us. So if you take a look, my theory is that anything that's 10 years old is really too old for me. I like to be on that bleeding edge of interesting stuff. And if it's 10 years old, it's, pretty much if it's 10 years old and still surviving, then the majority of people are heading that direction if they're not there already. And I don't want to be with the majority. I want to be out, on the edge of what's new and what's different. And anything that's 20 years old, the only people who are really looking at it are what Jeffrey Moore calls the laggards. And it's not interesting anymore because whatever is 20 years old is really hopelessly obsolete. And I'm going to put Scrum in that category because it's clearly 20 years old. It's got too many problems with it to be something we think of as good today. And it has brought a few good things, but we need to go past a lot of the agile practices that we think of now and start thinking about how do we deal with software engineering in the next century? How do we make sure that we drive what we do with outcomes, that we give the engineering team an engineering job, not a technician job, which means they're expected to create solutions to problems. How do we give real problems to software teams, to software engineers, and let them act like regular engineers, which is come up with creative solutions to the problem that they're given and measure them on how well they do and how creative the solution is. I learned to do software in an engineering department, not in an IT department. And believe me, a lot of the practices that we think are good in software would, for many decades ago, be considered insulting in an engineering department. Because engineers are problem solvers. They think for themselves. They are never told to do something. They're told, here's a problem. Come up with a way of thinking about it and a way of solving it. And we need to start doing that with our software engineers, or we're going to not attract the really good creative people to this job.
The shift in mental models that's happening is a shift from job of software is to do something for somebody else to the job of software is to create a product that will delight the people who will consume it. So product thinking, I think, is going to replace the order-taking thinking. Thinking someone tells you what to do and your job is to do it, that's the obsolete component of the mental models. We're not taking fast food orders. What we're doing is creating things that will delight people, that they will be willing to pay for, that they will use, that will make their lives better. That is the shift that is happening now. And one aspect of that is digitization of corporations, where the focus is not on doing stuff we've always done just more efficiently, whatever that means, but rather focus on making the experience of the people working and the people who are being served by the corporation much quicker, easier, more effective, meeting the needs of everybody in a much better way. So it is a change that obsoletes not any particular practice. Practices are often useful, but the way we think about what's good. What's
So,
good is creating really nice, delightful products.
so you want to think about rapid technological change. I will take you back to March of 2020. Halfway through the month, for the next 2 to 4 weeks, everybody in the whole world figured out how to do school online, how to have doctor visits online, how to have conferences online, how to use technology tools to keep everybody apart so that everybody could be safe. The technical change in that first month, first 6 weeks, first 2 months, after everybody realized that this pandemic was very deeply serious and scary, was remarkable. More progress was made than would have been made in 10 years if there hadn't been this trigger. It can happen fast. Rapid change is not a matter of can we do it? It's a matter of do we want to do it? And so right now, within a month, the insurance companies in the US figured out how to allow doctors to charge for telemedicine. And all of a sudden, and the doctors figured out how to do which ones like to do telemedicine and how to do it. And all of a sudden, telemedicine became common. And it's not going to go away. Teachers learned how to teach online. Our 7-year-old granddaughter did her entire first year of school at home online in a very disciplined environment. She loved it. And in Chicago, they said, where our daughter teaches in middle school, and she struggled for the first few months, but she figured out how to do it. They said, we're not going to have snow days anymore. Because guess what? If it snows, teachers at home pick up their computer, the kids are at home, pick up their computer because they all have them and they all know how to use them. Okay. And this happened like almost overnight. Everybody went home from their offices and virtually overnight, we figured out how to use technology to not have to be where it was dangerous with other people. Just instantly. And all over the world, it doesn't matter what country you are in. So that can happen. It can happen extraordinarily fast. But it's not the technology and it's not the capability of the technology to solve the problems that is the issue. It's the desire of people to change what they're doing to something new. And when you want to change what you're doing to something new, you would be amazed at how much technology there is out there that can help you and how easy it is, if that's what you're completely and totally focused on, to take, all the schools in the country and put them online. How can this happen? But it did. And that's sort of my model of, if you want to know what rapid change is like, you just went through it.
What becomes obsolete is not what you're capable of, but what you want. And that is an example of all of a sudden we want to use what we're capable of in a different way.
Yeah, that's amazing. Though I have said that was the last question, but I can't resist myself from asking this question because both of you have decades of experience and you have seen the world changing, you have seen the governments changing, you have seen the technologies changing over the course of last 30, 40 years. So what is one tip that you would like to give our millennials to sail through the changes?
One tip to sail through changes.
This too will pass. People will see what's good, what's bad about changes that we decide we want. And most of the time, we don't want all of the results of what we want. So we come up with alternate approaches and try and adapt them so we don't lose everything that was good about our previous way, but don't have to suffer from the shortcomings of the assumptions that were underlying our previous aspirations.
So I want to pick up on just one thing you said, and that is the thing that I think you need to be careful of, because I like change. Okay, I never had any much trouble with change. I really enjoy it. But I also have seen change forget the good parts of the past. You know, as we have a saying, don't throw out the baby with the bathwater. Don't forget that there is good in the way we do things now, and remember to bring that forward too. There was, I've seen a lot of change, but when I first was married and first got a job was when the earliest aspects of the, when the book, The Feminine Mystique, was published, and the earliest aspects of the thinking about women in the workforce happened. And thinking about making sure that a husband and a wife were treated as equal financially and stuff like that. And then maybe, you know, I can remember having arguments with doctor's offices because they would bill Tom and not me. And I said, you want to get paid, you bill me. Actually, I happen to have the insurance, you're going to bill me. And I mean, I had a 1-year argument with the doctor's office who wanted me to pay, but they wouldn't send a bill in my name. And I said, okay, this is very simple. Make your system, send me a bill to my husband, and you'll get paid. And I did this for a while. Now, and everybody learned, credit companies, financial companies, to treat people equally. But then some 15 or 20 years later, they all forgot, most of them, and started doing the easy and efficient thing, and, you know, putting all of our financial statements in a single envelope, or treating us as a single entity rather than two different people. And they seem to have forgotten the fact that we are individuals, not a couple, when it comes to many, many things. And so when it comes to how do you talk about the title to a home? You know, when we bought our home, they wanted to put the home in the name of Thomas Poppendick and Mary, his wife. And I said, how about Mary Poppendick and Thomas, her husband? Oh, that was really hard. So they did Mary. But whereas people became keenly aware of this in the 70s, they kind of forgot about it by the 90s. So things that we fight hard for, whether it's equal status or anything else, sometimes once you get halfway there, you fall back. And the next generation comes around and forgets what the hard-fought battles of the earlier generation, and forgets the stuff that made life, that people fought for, to make sure that women and that had equal rights, that different races were treated the same. And, you know, the battles that we fought for racial equality in 1968 are happening all over again. And you would have hoped that we'd have learned it back in the 60s, but we didn't.
It's
Yes,
because practices are not the same as underlying assumptions.
true, true. And I'll always remember to carry the goodness of past and today along with me wherever I go. So thank you so much for that
Thank you.
insight, Mary and Tom. And it was amazing to have both of you. And this was an incredible discussion that I had. Thank you so much for being with me.
Thank you for inviting us.
It's been fun.
It's been a lot of fun. Thank you.
Amazing. Thank you once again. Thank you.
Bye.
Don't.